Rewind, Your Week in Review, is sponsored by the Wisconsin Realtors Association, bringing Wisconsin communities to life with great homes, businesses, and neighborhoods. The Wisconsin Realtors Association, the voice of real estate.
This week on Rewind, Your Week in Review, a pair of GOP lawmakers are calling to overturn the 2020 election. We'll tell you why their impossible effort is putting the Republican Party in a tough spot. Plus, state election officials testify at the Capitol to debunk conspiracy theories. And schools are beginning to rethink their masking policies. We'll tell you what the UW system is planning to do as cases continue to taper off. All this and more on Rewind, Your Week in Review for February 18th.
Hi, I'm Emilee Fannon.
And I'm J.R. Ross.
So this week we're going to start on kind of recapping the week, and we're going to start on Tuesday, which was the governor's State of the State address. Now, last week we gave a little bit of preview of what we expected to hear, and most of the things that we thought he would touch on, he did. The biggest one, I think, was him touting his using a portion of the budget surplus to send every resident $150 checks. Now, he also had some new announcements. We have a breakdown right here. About $30 million for EMS providers, and $20 million of that would be dedicated to rural departments who are struggling right now. $25 million for the UW system to extend their tuition freeze through the 2022 and 2023 school years, essentially funding the freeze, and $15 million for K-12 schools to expand mental health services, and $5 million to expand mental health services for the Wisconsin National Guard. So, JR, he also went on a tour shortly after his State of the State address the next day, touting these $150 refund checks, and he announced that he's going to be calling a special session, sign the executive order the next day, kind of to basically try and demand Republican lawmakers to vote on this, in a sense of a kind of a campaign strategy, right? Well, if Republicans didn't vote on this, you're not going to get your $150 check. So I guess, what did you think of the governor's speech?
Interesting. One thing that people point out to me was it's the only time I've ever seen a Democratic governor say it's their money, give it back. And Republicans sat on their hands and said, well, not yet, right? It's a really weird dynamic of a Democratic governor talking about tax cuts, giving people money back. We have a surplus, let's give it back to them. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic that way, but the governor had a good message about we have the surplus, let's do something with it. People are struggling, let's help them, and also had action out of it, right? He's going to call a special session. Now, remember, the governor can call a special session and require them to come in. He cannot force them to act, however. So all signs are they're not going to vote on this plan. What he's going to get out of it, though, is going to be more video of Republicans coming to the front of the chamber, gaveling in and out in 30 seconds, and he's going to say, look, they care so little about how you're doing at home, they'll even take like a minute and a half to talk about tax relief. Again, it's not normally the high ground for a Democrat about taxes, but for the governor, it's a good message. And talking to people this week, they gave him good marks. One of his better State of the State addresses now. Even Evers acknowledges that he's not the best public speaker. He joked last week about people that he's boring,
Right.
So not saying the bar is very high, but for the governor, it had, again, message and action out of it. Republicans on the defensive a little bit. Now, there were some criticisms. He didn't talk about violence or crime, right? There's a vulnerability for him. Probably not his best topic to talk about anyway, because it's not a strong point for Democrats. Some things like that he could have done maybe a little better. The elbow he threw at businesses about it's kind of corporations' fault that inflation is going up.
Right.
Whereas, we kind of know that there's been so much money pumped in the economy that's done things plus supply chain issues. Don't that landed very well. But overall, feedback I got was good speech, one of his better ones, good message and action out of it. So it helps him tee up that campaign message going forward.
And I think Republicans also wanted him hit on workforce. He did, and he threw it in Republicans' face and said, well, the unemployment rate is the lowest it's ever been, while under my leadership at 2.8%. Let's just take a listen of the governor kind of touting these touting these refund checks and the Republican response to it.
I announced my plan to use our surplus to help address rising costs and gas prices, to reduce barriers to work, and to invest in education at every level. We'd start by sending every Wisconsin resident a $150 surplus refund. Under my plan, if you're a family of four, you would receive $600 to help provide a little more wiggle room and hopefully a little less stress about making ends meet.
What we saw again tonight was the exact same empty rhetoric and campaign promises that are nothing more than focused on his 2022 reelection and not on what the real needs of Wisconsin are. We need to figure out how to deal with inflation in the long term, not a $150 one-time check. We need to make sure that we have funding for the institutions that are important, like our schools and healthcare, permanently, not using one-time federal dollars in order to do it.
So we know these checks have been a little bit political because it was in 2018. Governor Scott Walker also issued $100 checks to people and did a child tax credit. So Republicans, of course, liked it then. They don't like it now. Governor Evers didn't like it then. He wants it now. So it's just the politics around it.
It's like it's election year or something.
Yeah, right? An election year gimmick, as we've heard the phrase in 2018 and again now. Let's just now recap the Milwaukee mayoral race. We now have the final two candidates that will be on the ballot. Kind of no surprise with Cavalier Johnson is the number one, and then Bob Donovan kind of skirted out past the other candidates that are more Democratic. I guess now it's the question of how does Donovan get more Democratic votes, and where does the Lena Taylor votes, the Maria Dmitrievich votes, who do they go towards, or do they all rally behind Johnson?
And we talked about last week the coalitions. Donovan can't build a coalition to win. I mean, miracles do happen in politics, so there's always a possibility. Cavalier Johnson could do something horrendous in the next 6 weeks. If I were his campaign, I'd put him in a box between now and April 5th and not let him say or do anything. That said, just think about the dynamic, right? Donovan is running a law and order type campaign, tough on crime, reckless driving. Okay, there are only so many Republicans in Milwaukee. In November of 2020, Joe Biden won 70% of the vote. Milwaukee the state government under Scott Walker did away with the residency requirement for Milwaukee. It means cops and firefighters moved out of the city because they didn't have to live there anymore. The people who'd be receptive to his message aren't really there anymore. He actually went down from a 4-way primary in 2016 running as Barrett. He got a smaller share in a 7-way primary, an open seat. Like, it tells you, like, there's just not the audience there. Now, he's also not a very good fundraiser. He's well outpaced by Cavalier Johnson for cash on hand, money raised. Cavalier's an outside group helping him out. Like, even people who like Bob Donovan tell me he can't win. Again, miracles do happen. Cavalier could have some who just got him out of the closet. Something could really upend the race. But unless some dramatic happens between now and April 5th, Cavalier Johnson is probably going to be the first elected black mayor in Milwaukee history. And worth noting, if that happens, you'd also have an elected black mayor and elected black county executive in Milwaukee, which would be notable. So, again, miracles do happen, but I think Cavalier's a heavy, heavy favorite right now. And he's run a better campaign. He's got good messaging. He's presented plans about crime, right? So he's done a lot of the right things to deserve to win.
And he's been out almost every single day with a new announcement, like you said, mentioned crime, reckless driving. The other day he did something on paid parental leave for city employees. So he's been active and even been busy making the headlines. Moving on to our next topic, there was also a week filled with election headlines. We're kind of going to start off with on Tuesday, the same day as the State of the State. It was a busy day at the state capitol. There was a rally of people, I guess, supportive of overturning the election. And the two Republican lawmakers who are spearheading that effort is Representative Janelle Brandtjen, who is the co-chair chair of the Assembly Elections Committee, and Representative Tim Rantham, who just entered the governor's race over the weekend. And he's kind of just basically saying, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm here. I want transparency. I want truth. We heard Brandtjen, too, tell the crowd I counted about 200 people that showed up there. We were expecting 500, so it wasn't that big, but a lot of people listening to their messaging saying, hey, you're not crazy. We're still going to do this. And this is all centered around the resolution that Rantham's resolution that GOP leaders have blocked and have said it is unconstitutional. It is not going to happen. It is legally impossible for his resolution that is seeking to revoke Wisconsin's 10 electoral votes from Joe Biden. So with all of this, too, there's been a little bit of a shakeup in some of the races as well. So we kind of the leading off point here is that a former Republican running for governor, Jonathan Wichmann, attended Rantham's rally over the weekend, and JR, you discovered that he no longer is going to be in the governor's race and switching to the lieutenant governor's race. So a little bit of the shakeup there. So
Tuesday shows that Rantham is fully bought into the lane of the 2020 election was stolen, the big steal, right? Like, he is running on that full tilt, no holds barred about it. Wichmann changed registration on Tuesday to lieutenant governor's race. By the way, Roger Roth, who is a state senator, He got in the race yesterday, makes it a 9-person Republican field.
Yeah.
Real quick on that one, Roth comes in the race with $400,000 in the bank at the end of December. That's the biggest war chest of anybody. Pat Teston, state senator from Stevens Point, he had $130,000, I think it was, end of December. Ben Volkel, former aide to Ron Johnson, around 70. So that's your top tier right now. Wickman, I don't know if he's going to get any traction because he was running in that kind of lane that Rantham's in now for when he's in the governor's race. Well, can he get that traction with the LG race with that same message? We'll see. Is he going to hitch his wagon to Rantham? We will see. But as we talked last week, the people I talked to don't think Rantham really has a path to winning the nomination. So there's a challenge there for that. But this is a symbol of, or symbolic of that part of the base that's convinced the election was stolen in 2020. They want to overturn the results. They want commissioners in jail. By the way, Racine County Sheriff is now asking other county DAs to pick up the baton.
Yeah.
With that case we talked about last week, Racine County DA says, I can't do it because I don't live here. Well, he's now contacted the 4 DAs with the 5 commissioners to say, you should take this up. We'll see how that goes. But again, this is that conspiracy lane, and they're growing for it.
And I think it's also, with Rantham's announcement, it's kind of changed the messaging a little bit from Rebecca Clayfish and Kevin Nicholson. This week, they were both asked on the radio, point blank, do you think Joe Biden won the election? They both kind of skirted that answer, where Clayfish previously did state, yes, she just said yes to the question. She believed, he won the election. So I think everyone's kind of tiptoeing to try to please the base. And what the big question mark is how many people are still in this lane, right?
Yeah. So both, if you watch like what Clayfish and Nicholas said, they both talked about election integrity. And what they're getting at is, the legitimate questions to be asked about should clerks fill in missing information on an absentee ballot envelope? Legitimate question to ask. Should the definitely confined voter law be revised? Things like that. Are they real discussions that we could have? Should drop boxes be allowed for absentee ballots? Those kind of questions. But when you talk about that and focus on those issues, you're also hinting at the stolen stuff without saying it outright, right? Now Rantham being in the race, it forces those guys to make a decision. Are they going to fully embrace President Trump's claims about the big steal and go down that path? And
it also, do they want Trump's endorsement, right? Because that's what Trump wants people to have their messaging behind, and he has praised Rantham for his efforts, but it's that fine line they're walking, right?
And now you're pulled in 2 different directions because it's a segment of the base, folks who turned out on Tuesday who have bought into the big steal thing. If you don't cater to them, could you get them to come out for you in November after you win the nomination? If you cater to them, do you lose people who are going, this stuff is nuts, I don't want to deal with this stuff anymore, let's move forward and look beyond 2020? Could you lose them? And what about like moderates and maybe conservative Democrats? Like, it helps to win a campaign statewide to have those folks in your camp. So that's a challenge for them all now going forward. How are they going to walk this tightrope on this issue?
Want to stay on the topic of Branchin just for a little bit because we want to mention she sent out a statement kind of really bashing Voss because what happened is this is around the Republican election bills that we've recapped a few times on the show. Branchin is basically saying Voss is quote unquote kneecapping her because he did not bring the bills to her committee, the Assembly Elections Committee, and instead handed them off to another committee. So she said in a statement, we don't have a graphic, but I just want to recap it here. It says, it's no secret that Assembly Speaker Robin Voss and Senator Kathy Bernier, who co-chairs the Senate Elections Committee, have been severely downplaying the significance of the voter fraud of the Election Committee, the Special Counsel, and numerous independent groups that have uncovered the facts. So, they haven't been butting heads for a while now, and this was kind of another jab where Voss kind of just said, well, I'm going to do what I want and maybe bring these bills to another committee instead.
He said state affairs can get things done in orderly fashion, timely, which is true. I mean, state affairs probably will move faster. The fear I got from Republicans was if you went to Branchin's committee that she would then demand they were changed to meet her concerns, which she is. She believes that Joe Biden did not win Wisconsin, that Donald Trump did. She has had a series of people come before her committee and air unsubstantiated claims about the voter rolls, those kinds of things. So if you go to her committee, you threaten the timeline, get out of here in maybe a week.
And they want these bills on the floor ASAP,
So somebody's going to on Tuesday and Wednesday next week, maybe Thursday, maybe one day in March. We're not sure when they're going to end yet.
Right.
But if you give Branchin the chance to revamp them, you delay the process. And then you have to get the Senate to get on board. Otherwise, you have nothing on the governor's desk before you break for the session. That would not be good. By the way, don't forget, Voss put Branch and Charges Committee start this session. Ron Tusser was the chair at the last session, actually had the hearing, the first one in 2020 to kind of look at things. When he saw what Branch was doing, he went and got Gableman, right, to do his own review. The perception at the time was that Voss was trying to rein in Branchin by bringing in Gableman to do like this, the big review of 2020. Well, here is again, he's reining in Branchin by going around her with these bills. They are not on the same page at all, and Branch is not happy about it, but she can't do anything about it either.
And this kind of, speaking of Branchin's committee, staying on that topic, top state election officials testified, basically debunking a lot of conspiracy theories. And this is the committee, like you just mentioned, a lot of conspiracy theorists with false claims and what they believe are their facts have testified and have basically given a platform on Branchin's committee. So WEC Administrator Megan Wolf and another specialist at WEC testified and kind of just said, they talked about a lot of things like allegations of postal addresses being used for hundreds of voters, explained how the voter rolls operate in this kind of PowerPoint presentation. Let's just take a listen before we dive into this, JR, of what some of these experts had to say and a little bit of the back and forth with some Republicans.
We are always looking for ways to improve the system, and there are certainly opportunities for improvement. I'm not offended by legitimate, informed criticism of the system. I believe it is important to address questions and concerns, in part to distinguish between genuine issues worthy of our energy to address and falsehoods that cause us to waste countless hours chasing ghosts. If we fail to make this distinction, then Wisconsin will have lost an opportunity to address real concerns while focusing on imaginary anxieties.
When you use those terms, you present a bias to the folks that are hearing these. Now, if you want to say the outer loop example is a fantastical claim and a sensationalized claim because obviously this was fairly easy for you to look into, or the individual Ambrose advantage or whatever, that specific claim is a fantastical claim, and you can make that, and I appreciate that terminology. But when you're saying all claims, no matter what you have to say, before we've even heard of them, are spectacular, fantastical, or imaginary anxieties, that's not the function of WEC.
JR, there was also one specific incident you want to talk about that was on there about someone's name that was used,
so
a questionable name who voted.
A lot of what came up this week was a direct rebuttal of somebody else who testified last week for the committee. And a lot of it is stuff that you look at the WISP vote system and go, well, that looks odd. There's a person whose name is Ambrose Adventure, all right? I think it's AA, it's our Adventure. And this was flagged as a possible fake voter, fake registration. This guy said, I did a 60-second search and found that he changed his name legally via the court system, and that he's legally registered to vote, and he is therefore an eligible voter. There's an explanation for this. Just like the hundreds of voters registered at the same address, they're college kids living in an apartment complex.
Right.
The people who have similar names at the same address, but a different middle initial, they're probably related. He said he looked at these examples, the average age difference is 25 years. That sounds like father and son or kind of thing, right, for voters? So a lot of the stuff that's been brought up are people who don't understand the system and go, this looks weird. This guy basically said, here's what the explanation is, so you know this is legitimate. Well, I don't know if he's going to knock all of it down.
Right.
But I watched members of that committee who, like last year, were saying we should overturn the election results because all this stuff is driving me crazy, going, that makes sense.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
They finally got their time to go, okay, thanks for the expertise.
Yeah.
Now I get it.
Yeah.
Don't know if they're going to move on, though.
Yeah.
Also just want to mention, because this we had some news on Friday about the ballot drop box saga, I guess you could say. On Monday, the State Elections Commission unanimously voted to withdraw its guidance that allowed people to use drop boxes, and now that was because of in response to Friday's ruling by the Wisconsin Supreme Court that says drop boxes cannot be used in April. So I guess there's now just a big question mark. What about the elections after April, which the high court still has to determine?
Yeah, the fact that the court didn't extend the stay until April probably doesn't bode well for the decision on the merits, but they haven't decided the merits of the case yet.
Right.
But that seems like a big hint to what's going on.
And we had a little bit of Gableman news this week. We haven't talked about his investigation in a little while, but he did withdraw subpoenas from Voces de la Frontera. Now, they were kind of, I don't want to say random, but they also just felt like, why are you subpoenaing us? What did we have to do with any of this? And they were issued subpoenas a while ago. They added on to the lawsuit with the Wisconsin Attorney General Josh Call, who is also challenging the legality of these because he says they're too broad. So Gableman withdrew the subpoenas sent to VOCES, and it's marking a pretty big victory for this immigrant right group based out of Milwaukee. So in the letter that Gableman sent, it says, please consider these subpoenas as moot.
I saw a tweet this morning that Voss went on a radio show and said that he signed 200 subpoenas.
Right.
We have only seen a fraction of that. So it makes you wonder how expansive a net that Gableman has cast. But so far, he hasn't gotten a whole lot. Now, he's gotten records from the cities that he's targeted, right? They've turned over a bunch of stuff, thousands of pages. But they are stuff they've turned over to other people. They've been open record requested for before. I still don't know where Gableman is going with this. But your guess with VOCES is that they were part of like the turnout operation, right, for Democrats in the fall of 2020. And there's some suspicion about how they worked with the cities. That's a guess. It's still an odd thing to be targeting private groups and asking for communications that they had and financial information about those groups. That's a little bit, maybe a bridge too far.
And Speaker Voss was also asked this week after the State Address, when's the deadline? When is Gableman's final report coming out? He said he still firmly believes it's going to be happening towards the end of February. So we'll see if that rings true, I guess.
Don't forget, Robin Voss wanted to base their final election bills off of the results of the Gableman investigation.
And those came out before the final report.
I'm sure it's a coincidence.
Also, let's now kind of shift to a new topic, basically a new bill Speaker Voss touted that would eliminate mask requirements at schools. So if you're a student and you get your parents' consent, you wouldn't have to wear a mask. Now, this kind of comes as a lot of schools are reevaluating their mask mandates because we're seeing cases plummet across the state, which is great news. But I think when the Speaker explained this in the committee, when we're about to hear from him, that, this is time. We've had 2 years of the pandemic. It's time to move on. It's allowed, goes along with the same messaging of giving parents more control over their child's learning environment and what's being taught in the classroom. So let's hear a little bit from Voss and the Democrats kind of still, stressing caution that maybe this is not the right time to do this.
There's going to be someday something a lot worse than what we just experienced. And are we going to go away from trusting public health?
Even though you are incredibly well trained and you have nothing but the best interest in the patient's, benefit, you're not always perfect. And I think we have now seen with the CDC that has definitely been proven true. I would say that many people in public health would probably take the most extreme potential to say liberty is not worth the sacrifice.
But if you study previous episodes of measles and smallpox and all of those things, people did give up some of their rights to eradicate those diseases.
Almost all of those efforts were mostly based on the art of persuasion, and it was a really good job of explaining to people why what was being done made sense. That was not done during the pandemic.
I want to also mention this bill that you just heard Voss testifying would also force schools to offer in-person instruction regardless of how coronavirus is spreading throughout the community. And like I said, too, this comes at a time as schools are trying to reevaluate because some health professionals are kind of saying we're in this endemic. We're seeing masking policies starting to drop. So this kind of goes over to our next topic of how officials are reevaluating things. The UW system this week announced that they're going to drop their mask requirements as soon as March 1st, no later than spring break. UW-Madison, probably a few hours after the announcement came, said they are going to lift theirs on March 12th. So it's up to each individual school district when they want to do it. And then Dane County is not going to renew its mask mandate on March 1st. We still haven't really heard much from Milwaukee officials when I've asked them. But last week, it was one of the top health advisors from Milwaukee County, Dr. Ben Weston, who even suggested that maybe it's time for schools and to counties to start reevaluating their mask mandates because things are looking good, things are looking up.
Yeah, a couple of things. What I'm wondering about the fall is it going to be a COVID election still? Right. So with the bill that Voss is touting, that is some virtual signaling to the base because Evers is going to veto it. If it gets to his desk, he'll veto it. Now, if you ask Republicans privately, they'll acknowledge, if there's a different pandemic someday, and a mask is the only thing that can fix it, we'd be in trouble if this bill was law. But we fight the last war in politics, often not the next one. So they know it's going to get vetoed, so there's a safety net there. But they also know that there are people who are tired of what's going on and want to be free of masks. Granted, it's only been Dane County, Milwaukee, they've had a mask mandate
The
in
strictest
effect this
policies,
year.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Schools have had them. It's up to individual schools. And interesting to note that I came in this building a long time ago with Republicans with the mantra of local control. It has now become local control unless you do something you don't like.
Mm-hmm.
And here's an example of them doing something they don't like, and so they're going to try to impose a one-size-fits-all approach to the state. You know, there's an argument for it, right? I mean, like, should parents have that choice? Totally get the argument. But it is a move away from kind of what had been the Republican mantra for a long time about, like, leave these decisions to locals.
Right.
Interesting note for Evers is he has not tried to do anything with schools as governor since the second stay-at-home order was overturned by the Supreme Court. He said it's all about schools, left it to them. So it's a different situation in other states like New York that had a mask mandate in place statewide and for schools. A little bit different situation for us.
Mm-hmm. And mask and no mask, we know, have been a big political divisive issue throughout this entire pandemic. Now let's get to stock picks of this week. You have rising Samantha Kirkman because of her advancement in the April election.
Yeah, so interesting to note, she placed second in a three-way primary. Now, big question from the February primary to the April election is who else is going to turn out, right? You never know for sure what's going to happen. She's running against the clerk of circuit courts who was elected county-wide in 2007. That person has been endorsed by both the outgoing county executive, Jim Cruiser, former Democratic state lawmaker, and the sheriff, who's a Trump supporter. Interesting coalition for her, which shows you that it can be more about like relationships and experience than like partisan affiliations for office like this. The challenge for Kirkman, obviously, is how you build a coalition to win. Kenosha County has been a swing county, almost always picks a statewide winner in statewide races. One exception was 2020 when Donald Trump won Kenosha County, possibly influenced by what happened in the city, right, with the violent protests and that kind of stuff. So can Kirkman capitalize on whatever energy's out there? And oh, by the way, if she wins, she has to leave office because Republicans passed a law in 2016 trying to target the Winnebago County executive running for state senate that said you cannot serve both as county executive and a member of the legislature. If she wins, she'd have 60 days, I think, to resign. So that's something to watch because that would be then the 9th member of the assembly to leave, to either retire, announce, seeking run for something else or whatnot. So just something to keep an eye on.
And then mixed this week, former state rep Josh Zepnick, and he advanced also through the April election for Milwaukee County Board.
Yeah, placed first in a four-way primary. Surprised a lot of people. Very low turnout primary. That said, there's some seeing this as like Zepnick's possible political redemption comeback. Democrats don't really want to see the comeback. Now remember, Zepnick was a member of the assembly. He was accused of kissing two women without their consent, right? He lost a primary in 2020 to Marissa Bell Cabrera. He had beaten Cabrera in 2018, lost to her in 2020 in the rematch, partly spurred by this, but also because that district had been changing. It's becoming more Hispanic. This county supervisor seat, very interesting. It is a 66% Hispanic district. Zepnick is obviously not Hispanic. It's more kind of like that traditional South Side with Milwaukee ethnic politician. So he's running against a guy who is Hispanic. The question is, do the voters want somebody to look like them? Right?
Yeah.
Often an issue
question.
in majority minority districts. What will turnout look like? We don't know. And even though it's a very Hispanic district, sometimes you don't have very high turnout among Hispanic voters in elections. So the sleepier the April election is, the better Josh's chances are to get through if he has the right motivated coalition of supporters.
And that makes sense, too, because if people think Chevy Johnson is just going to, blow out Donovan, then there's less people maybe going to the polls. So that could possibly be a factor. And then following this week is William Pocan, who is the brother of Congressman Mark Pocan. And Senator Ron Johnson had some strong words of disapproval, I guess you could say.
So you have to understand the blue slip tradition. So in the U.S. Senate, if there's a judicial nominee from your home state, both senators have a blue slip. They have to return it to basically pave the way for it to move forward. Tammy Baldwin returned a blue slip for William Pocan. Ron Johnson probably not going to do it. And even though Ron Johnson, just like in June, recommended Pocan and 3 others for the White House to consider for this appointment. Now, the background is this. Wisconsin is going to go the Federal Nominating Commission for a long time. It's comprised of equal number of appointees by both Baldwin and Johnson. They screen applicants for open judicial spots, give them a list of candidates, and then tradition has been that the 2 senators send those candidates to the White House picks from them and makes the nomination. Pocan was the pick. Well, since June, when those names were sent to the White House, Johnson has since learned that Pocan A, set bail at we thought was too low in a single case, and B, has heard from people in the Green Bay area complaining that Pocane's not from Green Bay. Now, the Eastern District of Wisconsin has 2 benches. One's in Milwaukee, one's in Green Bay. This is the Green Bay seat. Judge Griesbach, who's on senior status, was a Brown County judge before he became the first person to have this seat. It was a big deal for Green Bay to get that bench because you're not going to Milwaukee for everything. And Milwaukee folks said we want somebody from Green Bay in the seat. So there's a legitimate question there, right? Should you have somebody locally based? Pocane is not from Green Bay. His husband, however, is, and I was told that Pocane indicated he would move to Green Bay. So there's that issue.
Wow. Yeah, that's...
Well, there's that issue.
Great.
Also, don't forget, it's a single judge district, which means if you are an attorney looking for a favorable or a favorable environment, if you perceive it to be a liberal, you might go to that court because you might have a better shot of giving a favorable decision versus going to the other federal courts, which have a mix of Republican and Democratic nominees, with more of a lottery system, right? You don't know what you're going to get. So there's that issue. There's also the issue of, okay, what's wrong with this guy? Like, why was he okay 6 months ago but not now? The bail thing, Johnson mentioned Waukesha, the Waukesha Christmas parade thing in his release. Kind of a really ham-handed try to tie that in because, yes, there's an issue about low bail, but Pocane had nothing to do with that case whatsoever, right? The one case Johnson's office gave us was from 2014. A person who was on $2,500 bail was accused of 2 more crimes. Pocane set it at $5,000 for the new bail at the recommendation of the prosecutor. That's her one example. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, for others, but one thing out of like all these cases is kind of like an interesting thing. Don't forget it's election year.
I was like, JR, you do know violence and tough on crime is a big aspect of Republicans' election year.
But then, and also don't forget, even though Democrats aren't happy about what Johnson's doing, Baldwin did the same thing just a few years ago. Gordon Giamperto, who was a pick, again, the nominating commission identified him as a candidate. Johnson and Baldwin sent him off the Trump White House. Baldwin then said, whoa, I've seen this guy say stuff about gay marriage and diversity. I'm not comfortable with it anymore. I'm not giving back my blue slip. That submarined that nomination. And led to Judge Ludwig in Milwaukee, who, by the way, was the one who rejected Trump's appeal of or challenge of the Wisconsin elections. That's another thing in itself. Anyway, what's the point of the commission if you're just going to reject the people he identify? At the same time, people argue to me, as a senator, you shouldn't just give away your advice and consent role to 6 people you've picked to identify candidates. You should still exercise that role as a senator. So these guys are within their rights to question things. But unless Johnson gets his blue slip on Pocane, it's not going anywhere. It's dead in the water.
All right. Well, thanks for that expertise on that process. That will do it for this week. I'm Emilee Fannon.
And I'm J.R. Ross.
We'll see you next week.
Rewind. Your Week in Review is sponsored by the Wisconsin Realtors Association, bringing Wisconsin communities to life with great homes, businesses, and neighborhoods. The Wisconsin Realtors Association, the voice of real estate.